Welcome to Football and Finance. I'm Nash.
I'm Joe or Joseph.
We've got some exciting topics for you today. This is our fifth episode. Topics that have interested us in the world of football this week and finance. We're going to kick us off. PSR, the profit and sustainability rules. What are you laughing?
I'm just surprised that you were going to jump straight into it, not talk about the weeks of.
I'm just all business.
Hey, I thought you were going to talk about that Barcelona 17-year-old like marked Mbappe on a Wednesday,
Oh
doing
yeah,
algebra on a Thursday.
fair enough. I did just skip over that's the only way to do it, isn't it? He did do a good job on Mbappe, to be fair. But that whole squad is like 15. They're all like,
It's when I saw the video of him coming into school the next day, the hero's welcome, and I thought, wow, like you just marked the best player in the world, and they're asking you to start doing simultaneous equations like on a Thursday morning.
yeah,
I'm taking the week off.
how's your trigonometry?
I'm taking the rest of the week off. I'll be like, I marked Mbappe. My brain's tired. My legs tired. I'll see you lot on Monday. Someone run my mum the homework.
Yeah. Head teacher couldn't even talk to me if that was me, to be honest. We moving wild at school.
Could you imagine? I'll be having lunch at the head teacher's office. I'll be like, hey, I'm not eating with the rest of the kids, so you better set me up in your office. Gold cutlery, 3 course, fine dining, gourmet. Tell the other kids that I'll sign autographs on my way out at the end of the day.
Yeah, my free period.
No, but it's like I know we laugh about it, but like on a serious note, like when you look at PSR, you can. I know it's a little bit different in La Liga, but you can see where PSR is going to start influencing clubs in terms of people may not spend or may have to field young teams. I know Barcelona is a bit different, but it is something that you start to see it permeate when you look at other sports, you look at other teams, and you look at how they're lined up, and you're like, are you going to see Aston Villa and all these other clubs start fielding younger players, which is obviously great for those players, but maybe to the detriment of overarching performance. But I think PSR is just like, I feel we like to talk about it every week. And it's one of those that like, you're like, every week in a podcast, or you and I, when we see each other during the week, we chat about it, but it's just like, there's a new story, a new thing, like Fulham this week. I think you pinged me that saying, like, about to lose 26 mil, gonna fail PSR and stuff. And I'm like, can we just say the whole league apart from Brighton has failed? Like,
And maybe Brentford.
I'm Brentford. Can we just 18 of you or 17 of you, you've all failed. Like I'm less interested in who's passed, or sorry, I'm less interested in who's failed and more interested in who's passed, because that pass population is narrow.
Yeah.
But what did you think when you saw the Fulham thing?
Well, again, I think that people are thinking, Fulham reasonably well run club. They have somewhat of an aging squad, so you probably think actually, yeah, they're going to be paying a premium like when you get to the older parts of your career. So it wasn't surprising that they were kind of teetering on the edge. But they're not like big flashy spenders. Obviously, they had the Mitrovic sale, which kind of brought them back in line. But they do a lot of the right things. I know they're trying to build their stadium, and I think they're having a little like battles with the council about that. And I'm sure it's going to be nice on the river there because they've got that.
Yeah, I saw that. The Riverside stand. One of the stands have like a infinity pool or something.
Yeah, they're trying to make some like Dubai-esque stand on the Thames. But for me, I was thinking, well, if Fulham is that, as I said, they don't come across as fiscally irresponsible, and they're basically teetering on the edge, and they're playing good. I guess we could call them like a mediocre side. Happy to finish 10th. Anything above is a bonus.
Yeah.
And they're not doing anything to like kind of flagrantly.
No, not Forest or Chelsea jobs.
Yeah, like how like what is it just recreating? Is the PSL actually helping anybody? And clearly it's not, because Premier League said this way.
No, that's not the way it went. They They saw it, they took on board feedback,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
yeah,
spoke at the shareholders meeting to the shareholders. And then, wait, I'm telling you the official line of what's
yeah,
been printed. They spoke to the shareholders. They took on feedback from the clubs, and they felt that the current rule, or the way it appeared in its current guise, may a bit draconian, archaic. So they came up with a new rule, like as a way to kind of address it. And that rule is now the squad. Was it the squad ratio calculation that
yeah.
they're now going to be using? But before we even jump into that, I just thought, kind of like you, when I saw Fulham, I just thought, wow, I actually thought Fulham were quite a well-run club. Like you kind of said, I'm kind of interested to know how they could fall foul. But then you start to look at, I guess, when we talked, I think the last episode about like Leicester City and other clubs, I think people start to look at the Leicester and go, wow, if Leicester could go down, any of us could go down. And there's that shortage of obviously number nines, Mitrovic. They've done business in a very cute and smart way, etc. But what it kind of showed me is like looking beyond the clubs that people think are flagrantly breaking the rules clearly don't actually even work for the clubs that actually are trying to abide by the rules and do things the right way. Kind of like you've spoken about, like flagrantly breaking the rules. So I kind of thought, actually, if Fulham have fallen foul of this, like I know if you give like Chelsea a reprieve, Newcastle a reprieve, Aston Villa, there's a point where you start to look at certain clubs and then say, is it the clubs or is it the rule? Which then feeds into what happened at the back end of the week. So that was kind of my first initial weekday reactions. But then obviously Friday night, you know what I mean, chilling out, about to go to bed, and then I'm starting to see like drip fades of Chelsea's obviously accounts. Like their accounts got dropped as well, or I guess it kind of fed in and filtered into the public sphere, and it looked like Chelsea basically bust case. I was like, wow. I expected they were going to bust case. I think you know me. I've been telling everyone like these guys have made their money in the financial sector. They're different owners to Roman. And I think a lot of these new owners, like Burnley, we talked about it when we talked about like Daniel Levy trying to raise funds. These state-owned clubs, PE, hedge fund, investment management vehicles, they're completely different ownership structures to a billionaire who's made his money in steel, who just wants to buy this club. Like these guys actually get how finance works. Like they might not understand the football inside, hence why Chelsea are ninth or wherever we are in the league. But the actual finance of running a multi-billion-dollar business or portfolio, they have a very good understanding of how that works.
Yeah, to understand money.
I'm down money. So when Chelsea bust case, I was just like, damn, man. Like now you add that to the rule change, just makes the Premier League look damn.
I mean, remember the Premier League is a collection of clubs, isn't it? They're all in it together and they all voted for these current rules, and now they're kind of voting to change them. So when we talk about the Premier League, is a reflection of the clubs. I guess one of the things what I was kind of interested in from the kind of Chelsea, moving on, is like in terms of like who are these other kind of top people using to consult with them, because with these hedge fund managers, investments, these people, or just people who are in that space. Surely, I think if Chelsea are using very creative ways in which to do things and very novel ways in which to float the rules, why are you not getting the same advice from the Big Four or other big consultancy firms, the McKinseys of this, whatever it is that may be out there, that's enabling you to kind of make smarter decisions that are akin to some of the stuff that we're seeing Chelsea, which is quite novel.
I think it's a good point, and I've kind of had similar thoughts, but I think the challenge is, right, it sounds wild to say this. Not all owners, but certain owners, of which like obviously Claire Lake, Todd Bowley, and Ben Adigbari are kind of probably part of that type of group, have either employed very smart people who understand the laws and the rules within which you have to operate within from a financial perspective, and actually looking at it line by line. So if we talk about, for example, how Chelsea is staying within profit and sustainability rules of the Premier League, they sold one of the things, they sold the hotel. So I don't know if you've ever been to the hotel. I don't think it's that nice, but they sold that hotel so they basically sold it from Chelsea FC Holdings to Blueco, which is another organization that Todd Bowley actually owns, for about 75, 76 million, right? So they sold the hotel plus the car park as a way of generating funds. That within the Premier League rules, you're actually allowed to do, right? And they actually consulted the Premier League, which is why I guess the question I've always been asking and asking people to ask in terms of just being generally inquisitive, when people have been talking about PSR, clubs that are going to fail while Chelsea get relegated to National League, FYI, shout out Wrexham, double promotion. But when people were talking about this, like, oh, relegated to National League, Vanarama, Man City, I was like, you're not really hearing the Premier League actually, they're not actively talking about Chelsea in the way, like, you hadn't really heard anything from anyone from their kind of group or a league talking about Chelsea. There'd been discussions about Chelsea for how they've been going about their business in terms of a bit more long term, and they were on their radar, but they hadn't been concerned. So clearly, when Chelsea decided they were going to sell the hotel and the land, they went to the Premier League and said, "We're going to sell the hotel to another part of the ownership or the umbrella organization, which is well within your rules. Are you cool with that?" And the Premier League are like, that they might have been cool with it, but it's within their laws that they've created. So they were like, yeah, I guess.
Like HMRC tax loophole.
Yeah.
You find the loophole, you disclose it to HMRC. They say, you know what, you can use it because we haven't thought of it. And then next year you'll see that tax loophole closed. But that's it.
So I think the thing is, it's more kind of the laws that were created under a different time. And now, and it's what's quite interesting is like people saying, oh, that's cheating, blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that a lot of really good sports journalists said is Chelsea are in a unique position. Most football clubs don't own hotels on site. It's kind of like Twickenham where you have that Marriott and stuff. Most you go to Emirates, or there isn't like a hotel, like an actual proper hotel, not just like 20 rooms that's bolted onto the stadium. So I think that's an anomaly. And I think it's also the thing around like what Chelsea did when we talked about salary caps, about changing the contract structure where it was no longer a base salary, but it was almost performance related. So there was a base salary that was lower and a performance related element that added it up, which evidently since Chelsea didn't hit those performance markers, the Champions League being the largest, there's been massive decreases in the playing budget, which is a large component of any football club's outgoings or costs. And obviously we know the player sales, right? They were selling everyone Saudi Arabia, and like they were getting some insane deals on players like Havertz who weren't worth the numbers they were going for, or Mason Mount, and that's all kind of added to it. But I think what that's kind of showed is Chelsea have found a way. They've not even found a way. They're working and operating within the rules of the law of the Premier League, and maybe those people in charge in certain spaces and speculators and accountants such as Stefan Borson are just not that in tune. And I always kind of think like the people that know the most usually work inside these organizations and are paid for their level of degree of competence and intelligence. The people on the outside are generally on the outside for a reason, either just because they are not in the know, they don't work best with these organizations, or they aren't the most competent people.
I guess that with Chelsea moving forward, a lot of this accounting gymnastics has most likely done away with now, obviously with the rule changes.
Moving to the squad,
the squad ratio
rules.
And it's following similar to what UEFA is doing, which is kind of a but I think UEFA are taking a phased approach. So essentially, you can pay on players and coaches' salary a percentage of your revenue. For UEFA, I think they started at 90, then the next season it's 80, then they're going to 70, and 70 is going to be if you're competing in any of those leagues. And essentially for the Premier League, it's going to be pretty much the same. I think it's 70, right? And
I
then
think you're doing 85.
80, oh no, 85. But then isn't there like a two-tier system though? With then
I'm not sure about. Oh, do you mean between UEFA? I think essentially. This is where we go into that thing about like UEFA and national governing bodies like the FA and the Premier League in terms of what are all their roles and how they interact and the difficulty of alignment. I think what clubs have basically said in the Premier League is if you go with UEFA's 70, you'll make the league less competitive. And if we're being honest, like brass taxes, right? The Premier League, as in the clubs, and the Premier League as in the organization that is the umbrella group of which they are all associates and affiliates, they all benefit from being the largest and richest domestic club competition in the world across sport. Anything that may hinder that is against or not in the best interest of the 20 teams and the Premier League. And having that 15% differential, they clearly believe the owners and the senior management within the clubs may act as a disincentive to be able to attract some of the better coaches, some of the better wages. And it's probably to also counteract that topic we talked about of salary inflation and transfer inflation that has actually been created by Premier League clubs, Chelsea, Villa, City, Forest, United, all those salary players on Rashford on 300k, Sancho on 300k, but playing for another team. All that salary inflation now means that 70% currently as it stands won't kind of hold water or wash its face for some of these clubs. But I think the bigger thing for me, and I don't know whether you thought about it, and this was just me just being naturally cynical, is having that squad cost ratio rule of like 85% on your revenue on transfers, wages, and agent fees. I was just like, that just sounds to me like if you're one of these clubs under a different model, you'll find a different way to make that total revenue number look bigger. You'll just find more and more.
You padding them stats.
Precisely. So it will affect clubs like Fulham's and the Wolves that can't do some of these creative stuff because of their ownership structure or just their market isn't large enough. But Chelsea, City,
and also it because I guess the way they haven't worked out the sanctions yet. I think I do believe there will still be points deductions for going over, but if it's just a financial penalty, then you'll just pay the financial penalty for a lot of these big clubs, and you've got a bigger margin to go over if your revenue is higher. So if your revenue is 1 billion, then you could do, and you could spend 900 million, or I'm sorry, 850 million. But if your revenue is 100 million, you can only spend 85 million. So it is trying to force you to kind of spend within your means. And I don't know if that's kind of will that stifle the innovation, creation, risk taking, entrepreneurship that you have in other freer markets where there isn't this level of regulation. And you can see it now where things are going to be attributed to a club's performance in terms of like generating revenue, which may only have limited links to them in terms of them actually generating that revenue. Can you actually say that was Chelsea, or was that part of the group?
The thing is, though, that's wild about all of this is I actually think that so just before obviously the transition to the squad cost ratio rules, there was that story in the paper about the Premier League were considering the NBA luxury tax, which you mentioned in one of our previous podcasts as actually potentially a solution.
They still may be considering it as a penalty of the squad.
Precisely. Which is why I think, like, is this an open admission to those that are willing to see or hear it, that they believe actually football within the Premier League has become unmanageable from a financial perspective in terms of gotten out of control, that they're just actually saying, you know what, we end up with this luxury tax. We'll tax the top clubs for doing this, right? We'll tax them heavily, but they'll take the risk, because if you're Man United signing a Victor Osimhen for 150 million, him getting you 30 goals, getting to the Champions League, winning the Premier League, the risk outweighs the reward outweighs the risk. So you'll just be like, cool. You almost like write that off. Like you will almost have that as a line item, like with deductibles or exceptions that just basically brings your revenue down. Where you're like, let's just put 50 mil aside for this kind of fine. It's the way like banks used to post financial crisis used to almost set aside a pot to pay fines to regulators. A designated pot, but it was kind of like we'll probably get dinged for a couple of regulatory breaches here. Here's a little coffers that's earning on the side. If we don't get fined as much as we thought, that goes into business activity and generates a multiplier. If it does, we've already accounted for it. So I almost think that we'll end up there. But then I think the question is like, and this question has been going around for years now. It's like luxury tax, salary cap. How can you actually cap their financial spending when the individuals that work at these associations and organizations and the companies they employ have way more creative resources than you, have larger resources to focus on this? Like the Premier League has to worry about 20 teams. The 20 teams have to worry about themselves. Within themselves, they've got departments. That department that the Premier League has to suffice 20 teams. That department Man United and Chelsea has, that's just their job. Their job is to focus and resolve this. What they don't have to worry about the other 19 teams. And I kind of feel like they will always be 2 steps behind, and whatever outcome they create will invariably have negative impacts on some clubs more than others because the gap has just grown so large.
And that's the thing. Is it institutionalized these the inequality, call it for one word, like in terms of the bigger teams with the smaller teams, where it's been reinforced in a time where there was lots of free market factors, and whereas now we're trying to kind of almost what's the phrase is like the horse is bolted and you're trying to rein them in, that sort of thing. Like, is it?
Well, I guess it's horrible, right? Because they can't be seen publicly to adopt that stance.
And so remember these changes were unanimously voted as well. So there's like all the clean teams vote for it. Now, do you want to be that one team that's like, oh, I actually don't want this because 19 other teams have said it, and you then become outcast?
Brighton.
Yeah, the power of like, no, maybe Brighton, Brentford. But maybe Brighton, Brentford are okay with it because they've been following the rules for so long that they're like, oh, this is just what we're doing anyway, so I'm happy with it. Does that make sense? So they're not overly offended by these new rules because they were the ones who were keeping to the rules anyway. And so.
But my worry though for those type of clubs is they've kept to the rules in its current guise. The new rules will become less and less favorable to them and more favorable to clubs. Like you just said, for example, if it's 85% of your revenue or 70% of your revenue, all their revenues are different, right? And Brighton don't have the ability to, I don't want to say synthetically manufacture, but creative financial gymnastics. They don't have the bandwidth, or not necessarily because they don't have competent, intelligent people, but their business model doesn't allow them to do certain things that other clubs can do. And as that kind of the headroom at the top gets increased for clubs to become even and ever more so creative, clubs like Brighton that never attempted to be that creative or don't have the capability to, that gulf becomes larger to the point that clubs like the Leicester cities that thought would never get relegated, or Southampton get relegated.
I think one thing we should point out definitely is that the current rules are remaining in place until the 25-26 season, right? So technically, the years of fraud allegedly that Man City have been doing and breaching, and people going on about Chelsea, it's still the current, 105 million across 3 years debt that you're allowed is still in place. But what I do think it does is it creates I think about it like this, yeah. Weed in America or cannabis in a lot of countries, it has been legalized. But 5 years ago or 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there's people who were going to life sentences because they were 3 strikes and out because they were selling weed. So now you're creating a system in which people have been heavily penalized for something that you now you say, oh, it's fine to do that, like because it's fine to have a 105. You could have a £500 loss if you want to, whatever it is, as long as
your revenue,
as long as you're not spending players, coaches, and agents at 85% less than your regular. So does it then mean that anything that, say, is outstanding is now kind of looked at differently? I know the rules aren't changed, but will people say, actually, how can we really enforce these rules where we know they're being demolished? Like, it just feels odd, and that's why I'm drawing the comparison of, like, people are outraged that certain people who have been criminalized for using cannabis, selling cannabis, all this kind of stuff, but now you can go to a canteen in California and go to a dispenser, and everyone's happy, and it's not a problem.
I think it just starts to show, and obviously starts to feed into our next topic, that it's just unmanageable. Because I remember, I don't know if you read something. So like Chelsea sold Lewis Hall to Newcastle, right? It was like a sale, a loan with an obligation to buy.
I think it's making permanent at the end of this season. I think
it's permanent as of this weekend.
Oh, okay.
So the rule was apparently, if Newcastle finished 14th or higher, it became permanent. And obviously the win against Spurs, wow, they got obliterated. Their win against Spurs means they can't finish lower than 14th. So that's been triggered, and the sale is actually now, so it's now a permanent.
Cool.
The reason I mentioned that is because when I was reading about it, loads of articles online and loads of different sports journalists both said that Chelsea and Newcastle are going to count that transfer in different seasons for their books. So for Newcastle, that's a 28.5 million in the red of your book. For Chelsea, that's 28.5 million in the green. So Newcastle, from early indications, Newcastle are going to count it this year, and Chelsea are going to count it next year to go alongside of the Mason Mount. And the reason I use that example is, this is 2 clubs involved in the transaction of one player. One's a buyer, one's a seller. But the marker or measurement is not consistent. So the clubs are choosing to count it against their books, all legitimately, again, not doing anything or infringing any laws. But it invariably means that when the new season comes around, you're allowed to lose 35 million a year. Clubs never start on zero. They can never, ever be in equal positions. And then this kind of lends itself to why you can see that the call for those regular season forum matches and those matches needing people wanting to see El Clasico in New York or the Manchester Derby in LA under the lights, why the call for that becomes more prevalent. Because I guess for some clubs, that is a way to keep them more profitable. Like more games. We talked about the Champions League format last week. Other clubs, that's a way to grow their brand, where they're actually thinking about, okay, we want to grow our fan base beyond just this city within the UK. We want to be massive in America. We want to be massive in North and South America. So that takes us onto that regular season forum matches. And then when I think about it, it then starts to also make another mockery. Like you've seen the Premier League have carried a fat L this week. FIFA have now carried another L themselves with this regular season forum matches, because now this becomes even more likely that this is actually going to happen. And I don't know what you thought about when you heard about the forum matches back in the team in the US after they kind of settled their antitrust suit with Relevant Sport.
I like it, but I'm not like someone who's that patriotic, so I'll just put that one out there. That this is not my club, and my club must play in here forever. I think it has a great opportunity to grow it for other fans and other people to access it. I say it's still going to be hella expensive, so there is a certain point of finance you're going to need to go to those games, like when you go to the NFL games that are here or in Munich, or they have them in Mexico. And there's just a great way to grow the brand. And I think we talked about before, there's some clubs who are almost elite brands, institutions that just sit around the world. Now, unless I'm trying to think of you might be able to capitalize on your owners links to another country. You know, we have a lot of foreign owners. That was what, so say like is he from the Philippines or Thailand? The owners of Leicester, previous owner who sadly passed away in a car crash, in a helicopter crash. Say like they was to do a game there with Leicester, and you could actually kind of pick some of the things that you want to do. You could see the huge financial incentives that would create for them. So you could almost tie it onto some of your places where you can grow your brand. The difference, what I think for me was because I started thinking about, you know, the international games. They have baseball games here in the UK. They have NBA games across the globe. Is that those are by far and away dominant sports, almost single sports that are not really replicated outside of the US. In Japan, yes, you have baseball, or in Asia, you do have baseball, and you have European basketball here. But it's not huge, let's be honest. The NFL really doesn't exist. There's a few, like you got the Canadian Football League, and you got a few like European Football League, but it's just nowhere near. And it's like it's not even in the same universe. But with football, you say like you did like the Mexican League is big in Mexico. You know, obviously the South American leagues are huge in South America. So where are you taking it that you've there this natural friction that you're going to have between leagues that you don't have with like current international fixtures from those like big American sports? But I like it. I feel like it's a good idea. I just feel like it gets different people involved, gets different people talking about it. I don't think you will get to the stage where, you know, you'll have a team that's permanently based in another country, or Man City are going to move to Hollywood or something like that. I don't think that's going to get. You're still going to get 19 home games, 18 home games, or wherever it is where you are. But just, you know, for people to kind of see different things move around, I think it's really, really valuable. And just players get to kind of be appreciated by people from across the globe, and, you know, maybe not experience racism while they're here. The black ones, anyway, they beat that one here. But, you know, get to experience like different sort of fans welcome them. And just imagine if they went to Lagos, Johannesburg, Nairobi. Oh my goodness! Like for serious games, that would be just a different experience that they probably only get if they're playing in international competitions. Obviously, a lot of the Premier League players play in international competitions, and they get to move around a lot. But it would be completely different. You know, the vibe is completely different when it comes to international and league games. So for those reasons, I like it. I think, but I said I'm not that person who's like, our teams need to be playing at home in England.
It's weird because when I heard about it, I was like, damn, man, loads of governing bodies taking L's this week. Like,
yeah,
a couple Premier
League. He's not been running a racket. That's the thing. Like,
you all know the FIFA documentary.
He's not been running a racket for so long. Like,
I think the thing is, right, and it'll be really interesting because obviously they must talk about this at like senior FIFA like members FIFA council meetings or Premier League meetings with senior execs or at the FA's council meeting. Like they must talk about some of these topics. As in, I almost feel football as we know it, not in terms of what's been played on the pitch, the players, the rules, but football is in the business side of football has changed in front of all our eyes, like all businesses do, right? Like if you're in the bakery in the 90s and a bakery now, completely different business model. You're probably not so much brick and mortar. You're big on the online kind of available, the kind of e-service, electronic service and all that type of stuff. You're more kind of available online. But I feel like football's changed in a way from a financial side that the people that are meant to govern it or legislate for it haven't changed with it or have noticed the change like way too late. And why I kind of say that is I said, when we were talking about football and finance, clubs, a lot of clubs making losses, heavily reliant on TV broadcasting money, etc., PSR, financial fair play, all these rules that they need to adhere to, right? One of the things that kind of grabbed me is it's like kind of economies of scale, that basic A-level economics, right? When you have reached a point where you cannot monetize the existing market you have more than you already think you can or have, you
It's
will
saturated.
consider yeah, it's saturated. So
Mhm.
you're Man United, and you're like, we have made as much money as we can make from the city of Manchester and the country of the United Kingdom in terms of our content, our sales, our merchandise, physical products, goods, and services. Like you then start to look beyond, right? Your beyond then became the Champions League, which was created for you in the 50s and the 60s, whenever the Champions League first started, or the European competition, as it was called before it was later renamed. You then start to look at other avenues. The other avenues becomes okay. The league isn't as competitive enough as we want it to be. That's the excuse or guys you put forward. It's top six. It's usually one of them. Blah blah blah. Why are we sharing TV broadcasting rights in the same mold with Sheffield United? We won the La Liga model. All that stuff, right? And then you start to then say, okay, how could this be more profitable for us? Okay, maybe if we're playing Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico, Inter Milan, and not playing Sheffield United and Burnley, maybe this becomes more profitable. You try that avenue, gets blocked. But they changed the setup of the Champions League anyway to kind of do that on the
Of
sly.
the Super League for people. What we're inferring there is the Super League.
It's a Super League.
Yeah.
But then you then think about, okay, maybe we should play in other countries and other markets, right? Like look at the Jags, use the NFL. The Jags do not sell out their stadium, like in Jacksonville. Like I've driven through Jacksonville. Like I don't know the population, so someone will correct me on online. I don't think there's enough fans in Jacksonville or the Jacksonville Jaguars to fill out their stadium. So, but look at it from a financial perspective, what those 2-3 games in the UK generates for Jacksonville and for the NFL. So it almost felt natural that the abroad games were going to happen. Like growing up, you'd remember they chatted about that 39th game. They were like, they'd have one game in the States, just like 2006, 2007, and that kind of went away. I do think like we are going to get games abroad, like you do inverse with America. But I do think that it's kind of like waiting for the time for it to be palatable to football fans. Because currently people don't want to hear it, right? People like same as like, well, the next World Cup is 48 teams. When they were putting forward that 48 team motion in the 90s, people were like, ruins the tournament, reduces the credibility, increases injuries, way too much football. How would it work? Now 48 team World Cup. When people were first saying only one team should host the World Cup because all the traveling, wait, then we had South Korea and Japan. Oh, that banged. Oh, what's the next World Cup? USA, Mexico, and Canada. So 3 countries. When people talk about the Euros being multi-country, every country getting 2 games, that worked. And I just think it's like football as a business has to move as fast as its slowest fan. And because the fans aren't ready to adopt it right now, doesn't mean it's not something that will be adopted. I do think it will happen, but I think what shouldn't happen, and I guess what do I know, is the first game should not be a massive game. It shouldn't be the Manchester Derby. It shouldn't be the North London Derby. It should probably be Burnley, Southampton. I'm assuming Southampton go up this year because like their third games in hand, whatever. It will be one of those where you actually see the logistics, or assuming those fans have a tie to that the states. Like Burnley have the American owners, the NFL player JJ Watt. So I guess you could probably try and sell that Southampton, etc. Or maybe it's not a Southampton, it's a Burnley versus a whoever. It should kind of start with that because invariably what will happen, and this is maybe the difficulty for football fans, you either move with it or it happens to you.
No, I agree. I think that when you think of like the games that are held here in the NFL, they're not always like the clash of the titans. So Jackson Jaguars, for a start, they're not a huge brand in the NFL compared to the other teams. I'm not sure if they're one of the teams that's ever won the Super Bowl. If they've won it, I don't think they've ever won. So, like, yeah, they are the equivalent of a kind of a relegation struggling team.
That's harsh, man. They're not that good, but they're not relegation.
Let's not go into their recent records. They've got a good young quarterback who's kind of decent, but outside of a good defense a couple of years ago, they've not been a historically good team for a long time. So yeah,
only for like 28, 30. I think they're less than 30 years old. I want to say 28. Like you got to put it in context.
And that's the thing about
older than the Jaguars. Like,
but the thing that's the point I was going to make is that it should be there should be some links built into the teams, like you said, the US link that they're burning. I think that should be leveraged, because in the same way that people got upset in the US when basketball teams moved from wherever to wherever, like they have a culture of like franchises moving, whereas we don't necessarily have that as football fans. So therefore, seeing games elsewhere is feeling like, oh man, you're taking away from the heart and soul of and the essence of what this is. But I just think it's part of the next evolution. I can't, and they said fighting it doesn't really help. And where I think it would just help is just like we already talked on the previous episodes about talent. Like there's also a war for talent, like and scouting and getting the likes of Burnley's and these other clubs set up across the globe in order to kind of grow the game so that people get involved from playing football from an early age and like get professional coach. I mean, good quality coaching that you can then use. It just then enhances the entertainment and the product at the end, which then you obviously turn back into dollars through sponsorship, TV rights, whatever it is. But I think it creates opportunity, like, and where we're at now, like it's football in the UK is so saturated, like it's on every day, all the time. That's one of the problems that we have in the women's game. Is like, how do we fit women's game into our current appetite for football when there's just so much men's football happening all the time around?
that one, like obviously, I think with the women's game and women's sport, that one works because it's a different audience. So there is an overlap if you think about it as a vendor.
But if there was less men's football, women's football would be more popular.
I would like to think so, right? I genuinely would, but I do kind of
popular before it was banned, so it's not like
I don't doubt that, and obviously I do kind of recall the historical kind of the genesis of like women's football, but I do kind of think like right now. So, for example, I've been to a couple of women's games, both Women's Super League and the Lionesses. Like I watched them play the Matildas, and then watched them play Ireland. But I think the thing is like right now it's a very different audience. There might be a crossover between like a dad who's going with their daughter or with their son, or turn into a family affair in a way they might not if they're a Spurs fan, a Crystal Palace fan, or a Millwall fan, etc. But I think that the thing right now is, and the challenge with all these type of things that we're talking about, whether it's ownership of clubs, whether it's foreign matches, whether it's merchandising and all this type of stuff, is they don't bring fans on the journey. And I think I said it to you when we called for lunch this week, where I said, like, I'm now kind of going against what I said during the week, like, but why should they? Because you're not like, it's not your money. You're not the one that has to clear the checks and pay the bills and switch off the lights. But I think it's the kind of thing is like, if they don't, the noise that fans can create can almost become not a permanent, but a temporary roadblock or inhibitor to what they're trying to do. So, for example, the uproar of the fans, you're stealing our game, like blah, 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 all this type of stuff, obviously melted into the European Super League must not happen pot, like with Gary Neville and all the others the Prince of Wales, etc. All those people kind of melted in to block the European Super League with the Prime Minister, etc. That's a temporary blockade, right? And I guess what I'm saying is, if you kind of solve the fan led bit early, that the blockades that you experience to some of these changes may be less challenging. But I guess also, if you're an owner, your perspective is like, to be honest, I don't really care, because I know it's going to happen in the end. It's my business.
Fans of, and we talked about being the first into something. Like,
the
Premier League is looking at the NFL thinking, "Raw, you're taking a lot of our subscribers, our clientele, our fans that we want in other countries." The more, I think we talked about, like, they're hosting a game in Brazil.
Philadelphia Eagles versus Green Bay.
So yeah, like, the longer you leave it, the longer it take, the harder it is to get into those markets. The more there is going to be a premium. So, oh, you want to do a Premier League game there at the same stadium that the NFL did? Okay, well, the NFL paid this much for this weekend. You can either have a trash weekend where you pay less, or you can pay a better weekend fixture wise and pay more. So and then you're like, oh, it's a better fixture, a better weekend. That hurts your fans more. So that's why we're saying start small, start with something that kind of everybody kind of wins. Everyone feels like there's a win in it, but ultimately it's about getting money, and these guys are gonna want to make their money. And like, I mean, again, this is maybe a values argument, but I find it very hypocritical that we could want to benefit from the internationalization and globalization of so many different sports that come to the UK, and that we love, and that we're like, oh yeah, even like
NBA, LeBron,
like
Trevor Lawrence is in London.
But we don't want to like share what we've created with the world, because that belongs to us, and this is what we made, and if you want to come see it, you have to come here. So like, oh man, like, but I said that's probably more of a value laden argument than a financial one.
It is, but I think the thing is, the financial one, which is obviously what the owners care about, is probably the one that's going to win out. The one I say probably is the one that's going to win out, because ultimately it is their money that they put at stake every single day. Like when Chelsea sign a player, or so and so sign a player, and that person's a flop or that person's a hit, it's not you that has to write that off. It's you're just a fan who's bought a football shirt, has a season ticket. It's not you that is ultimately feeling the pinch of the pain, no matter how well you're kind of tied in. And then when you kind of think about it, you look at like Newcastle United now. One of the arguments of their court case with their previous owner is like, I think his lawyers, so Mike Ashley's lawyers, one of their arguments was, oh, like, it's terrible for the fans, because obviously they can't, if they can't get the Newcastle United shirt, they may not come and shop in Sports Direct. And I know I'm being flippant, but for our viewers at home or wherever they are that are listening, obviously that Newcastle United story about next season shirts being sold like exclusively through JD Sports, that was kind of tabled as unlawful, is essentially what I'm talking about. And I guess you're starting to see where organizations are trying to expand their revenue, or they believe that they're not making as much as they are, the measures they're taking, like exclusivity of their kit is a way for, they believe they can generate additional revenue. They've obviously seen the data, they've got a level of comfortability with other clubs doing similar things, and they're trying to do the same. So like, that's what they're painting the picture out to be. But Nash, do you think it's that picture, or was it a final kind of with Mike Ashley? Like, get out.
Mr. Ashley is like Lord Voldemort to me. I don't want to say his name because I don't want him to come for me. Like, this guy is not a guy to be played. He's it feels a little bit salty. I'm not, because from Mike Ashley, I feel like
it's for both of them. Come.
It is not for both of them, but the fact you went to sue like after and call these rules anti-competitive, when this is like from his own playbook. Like, he was doing this stuff when, sorry, when he was the owner, and I think it's right to point out that Mike Ashley actually isn't the CEO of the group anymore. Fraser's formerly Sports Direct, who own so many brands. When I was looking into the brands that they have purchased in, or they have a small shares and they just gradually increase, you're like, wow, this guy wants to own everything on the high street. Like,
he buys a lot of distressed businesses, to be fair, and he's got a rap sheet of being able to turn them around. To his credit, I know he strips them for parts sometimes. Like, doesn't Debenhams, like
obviously House of Fraser. He's up to state in Hugo Boss. I think it was is it Hugo Boss? Yeah, I think it's Hugo Boss. Then he owns Flannels, and I say it's alleged. I think he has a large stake in Fraser's, that kind of holding group, and then his son-in-law is the current CEO. And since his son-in-law, who's been the CEO, the playbook hasn't changed. They're still doing exactly the same things that we were doing. He's got a bad rap, obviously, with Newcastle fans for basically rinsing the club, and everybody knows about his 0-hour contracts at Sports Direct. So why I think it's petty is because I'm not a Newcastle fan, but given how much we saw in the news about how much they hate him, no one's shopping at your shop anymore, bro. Like, no one's going to get Newcastle kits. Like, that doesn't seem like any Newcastle fan who supports the club would ever step foot, would be seen dead in a Sports Direct shop. But he talked about.
I think they would though. I think the thing is, right, it's one of those.
He does them cheap. He does.
It's
cheaper. So his argument is basically like they're competitive about this because we sell them cheaper, and it also means that other football stuff are bought within our stores naturally. But
I think it's one of those that's like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Because like when you actually look at it, right, like even the amount he was talking about, I think one of the arguments that were put forward by Sports Direct's legal representative and legal counsel was, if people weren't buying Newcastle shirts, there's all these other products that they wouldn't be buying because obviously they would invariably come buy the shirt and maybe purchase other items. If you actually look at the stock that they were actually requesting, it was actually, they're quite small volumes. So it was like 15% of the Newcastle kits that were produced was about 55,000 units, predominantly shirts, none of the rest of the like short stocks.
One pair of shorts for every 22 shirts or something like that.
Very limited amount. So I guess when you think about it, right, he's acting like these were like some flagship item, like it's like Nike Jordans, like a big flagship product within the organization. It's one of hundreds of other products that you also offer within your store. And I think one was the thing that was quite interesting is Newcastle were the only club he went after for this exclusivity because they're not the only club doing it within English or British football. So like it felt more like a personal.
That's what I'm saying. It's petty. It's salty. He's salty.
Quite personal, and I think the argument's also quite silly because like I've said, Newcastle were the only team you tell me a grievance about, right? But when you talk about reputational damage and the impact in terms of sales, right? Like
reputation is gone.
Your reputation with Newcastle fans and the association with Sports Direct is non-existent. And I think that's the bit that's kind of like gone unnoticed. And I think the other thing is that's also quite poignant is like I've never actually bought a football shirt. Actually, that's a lie. I was going to say I've never bought a football shirt from Sports Direct, but I actually bought one from that massive Sports Direct in Collieswood. My brother, the Man United kit. But what I was going to say anyway is, invariably for the clubs, those kits are. I remember. I think the reason I even went to Sports Direct at the time when I bought that kit 2 years ago was because it was cheaper than the Adidas shop and it was cheaper than Man United shop. So, but from the club side, so it was great for me as a consumer. I got 10, 15 quid cheaper than if I bought it from Manchester United or Adidas. But it's terrible for the club because clearly that discount comes at a price to them, like in terms of the total units sold, the negotiation that they've been able to procure with Adidas for that type of bulk order, etc. So I kind of found it quite strange, and I feel this thing about on competitiveness. I kind of see it in a different way. it's Newcastle United's product, right? How they choose to sell it, and this goes back to our Barcelona example, where Barcelona were going into the kit making business. Then Barcelona's is uncompetitive. Like
Yeah.
Nike should be suing them. Like, if Newcastle decide to do it in house or sell it to Sally, who lives in Gateshead, all 1 million units, and Sally's selling it, it's their prerogative because the product is theirs. You don't have this divine right of the product. Like, if they want to sell it with one seller or distributor, 20, none, do it in house, the prerogative is theirs.
I mean, yeah, and it's not water. Like, no one needs it to live. Like, so if it was something like that, it would be regulated in order that.
I kind of feel like the big players in this should be Newcastle and the kit manufacturer. So I think it's going to be Adidas. I don't know who they're with now.
So I think that the way they see it basically is that you can get it directly from Adidas. They're going to have their store, which will be run and owned by them. Currently, I think the Castor, is that the brand, who are they actually run the store, so they're not really making any money from that. They're going to take back ownership of the store, and they can sell all the Newcastle merchandise that you can think of and dream of. And then JD Sports basically will sell their other arm to it. And they recognized, which I think probably makes sense, is that not everybody's going to go online. Not everybody's going to come to the stadium. Like, JD Sports is big in pretty much every UK city. It's big in Newcastle. It makes sense to have it on the high street there so people can have it.
And they've got quite a strong online presence compared to, I'm not saying Sports Direct don't have a website. Of course they do. Right now, but I mean more like JD's web. I bought online items from JD. I've never actually bought online items from Sports Direct because I want to see that quality in my hand.
You get a choice. Like, it's like anybody, you get a choice of which brands you want to associate with, isn't it? Like, you may feel actually you don't want to work with this particular person because it devalues their brand, which it literally does, because they sell the shirts for lower than other competitors.
It's synonymous with being, like, it is like you and I said it when we play five-a-side. It's like you left your socks at home, you left your trousers at home, or shorts, shin pads. You go in Sports Direct, you get a Sonderco pair for £2. It's synonymous with being kind of large quantities, big units, low cost generally, like, which is sometimes a bit unfair because they do often sell some higher priced items, but then they also sell £2 socks or £1.50 footballs or whatever it is. So that does have an impact. But I think the challenge now, and I think the worry for the authorities, even regardless how the judges kind of rule.
They kicked it out on Friday. They stopped. I think they had the injunction. They asked for an injunction. They said no. So I think there's going to be the full trial, I presume. But the immediate injunction that Sports Direct were requesting, they was like, nah, which me is somewhat of an indication that, I'm not sure that it's going to be that.
I think the follow-on of it, or whatever the ultimate outcome becomes of this case, is interesting because I think, like you said, that thing about first mover advantage and innovation within clubs. The biggest worry for not just Sports Direct and what organizations like Sports Direct are creating is, if this is the relationship that they hold, where a club wants to go completely exclusive with one organization, as soon as one club at whatever level, like Brøndby in the Danish league or whatever, as soon as one club finally realizes how to do the kits without actually needing to use the current end-to-end process from product development, product design, all the way to distribution and sales, they find a different and more efficient way, it will hurt all these organizations like Sports Direct equally. And the reason I kind of say that is, right, I remember going to an event a couple of years ago when we were both at the FA. I went to the Football Writers Association, like just before the season. They had like a conference or like a chat, and they had Simon Jordan there. So they had it at a hotel in Marylebone. And it was really interesting because obviously Simon Jordan was talking about the future of TV broadcasting rights, right? He was saying Sky, BT, all these like bundling the packages in. Most people get Sky Sports for football, which I know is a generalization, but it's probably more true than it is false, right? One of the things he said is he outlined, although flippant, on the back of like a handkerchief, and I'm using that metaphorically, what a new football broadcasting model would look like if the clubs took it into their own hands. And it's that kind of argument, like TV broadcasting rights has plateaued, shirt sales, clubs have years and years of data. When that starts to seem to be plateauing, or the number doesn't seem to be the number they want, clubs may find ways to actually change the dynamic or change the model for them to gain a larger share, right? Just like they have with the league, where they're unhappy with the current split of broadcasting rights or the amount of revenue they're generating from home matches. They will find workarounds to kind of circumnavigate the impediments they're facing. And I almost feel that the worry is people may look at Mike Ashley and look at Sports Direct and say, they're moving mad, this is petty, blah, blah, blah. But the other Premier League clubs are on notice and taking notice of what's going on, because they're actually looking at it and going, if this does happen and Mike Ashley gets his way, and clubs actually start to see that the law doesn't favour them in the way they feel, they will start taking measures in place. Might not be this season, might not be next season, might not be the season after, but in 6, 7, 8 years' time, definitely the merchandising and the Barcelona going in-house and all this type of stuff that we all thought was banter, etc., and they were just fronting so they would get more money, actually will become something a bit more tangible.
Yeah. I think we've seen it before, so I don't necessarily think it's going to go in his favor, but I do think that, like, you're right there. I said people will continue to evolve. Will the Premier League clubs and the Premier League as an organization want to take on the responsibility of camera crews at every game, like all the kind of logistic that goes into creating like broadcasting content, having the relationships with the sponsors directly, like all the TV adverts, all the bet threads that you get in,
and a choice, you know, because I'd appreciate
your piece of the pie, you know, and they want to cut out Sky and BT or TNT and stuff.
I think they will do, and I appreciate your thoughts on it from an NBA perspective. But if we take like an NFL view, right? Currently, does the NFL govern the 32 teams and the 32 billionaires really? When it's the 32 billionaires that decide Roger Goodell, the commissioner's salary, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like the NFL, as the regulator, is almost a spokesperson of what the 32 billionaires want. The Premier League isn't yet there yet because they are still an independent entity when they want to be. But I kind of feel that when you say, will they want to do it? I kind of feel like their role will have to change. Like their role will either be, they'll almost become like mouthpieces and spokespeople for what the 20 owners want, or the shareholders or investment management firms want, and they'll have to demonstrate publicly some level of independence to not be seen as in bed with the owners and the clubs. But invariably, they just become mouthpieces. I don't know. I'd obviously appreciate your thoughts from like an NBA, like Adam Silver and the NBA commissioner. Does the NBA actually have the power over Genie Bussard and all these owners of these NBA franchises?
It's a franchise system, but I think that what we've talked, and we talked about this earlier in the week, is the power of the collective, who like generally have similar ideals, and of like, we're in this together to make money, and we have like an independent person who kind of helps us, facilitates us. That's what they do. They facilitate us in that direction. Whereas in the Premier League, like the head of the Premier League isn't a facilitator as such in the same way as Roger Goodell or Adam Silver, because they come from very different angles. Like the overall aim from the Premier League and the NFL is two different things in terms, even just generally like the people and type of people who own them, like and what they want to achieve within their particular like objectives. Like it feels very different. It feels very fragmented compared to what we've seen in the history of the NFL and NBA. So they're much more likely to collaborate on things where, so if it was to for something like, you know, we want to create a really good NBA app that does everything that that wants to, like, I'm obviously I don't know if the Premier League app exists, if that exists in another country, how it works, if it's like, but yeah, it's invariably there's like this tension that exists, I think, more with our Premier League clubs, and the fact that they're always changing. So it's like, oh, you're just getting used to the guy this guy works and how they operate, and then, you know, new guy comes in. Like, how many new NFL owners and NBA owners have there been in the last 20 years? Like, you can probably count them, you know. But with Premier League relegation and promotion, and then the selling of all the different clubs relatively quickly, I think you see that there just isn't that level of cooperation and trust, quite frankly.
Do you think also the reason, and maybe if somebody mapped out all sports and on a trajectory, you'd have the NFL, the NBA, and the Premier League. I do think, because on the life cycle, the Premier League is, when I say younger, I don't mean younger in terms of age. I mean younger in terms of level of evolution. I think the reason why you saw, or you are seeing, more sales of Premier League clubs than NFL, NBA, and baseball clubs over the last 20 or 30 years is because look at the price points they were going for. They were still relatively cheap. Like, I think Chelsea got sold for 2.5, 3 billion. So I can't remember what the stat is. Like 20 to 25 of the NFL teams are worth nearly double that.
Yeah.
Like, so the entry point to buy an NFL team is way higher. To buy an NBA team is way higher. But you can buy Burnley for 400 million. Yeah. You can buy Fulham for
Newcastle was what, 300 million in 2020, 2021, 20.
Yeah. You can buy Newcastle for 300 million, like, who are quintessentially one of the stalwarts of English football. You can't buy one of the stalwarts of you can't buy the Boston Celtics, or like one of the stalwarts of the NBA or the NFL, like the Dallas Cowboys, a terrible example, but like Buffalo Bills or the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going for like 4, 5, 6, 7 billion. And I think when the Premier League starts to catch up, because there's a point where no one will ever buy an NBA or an NFL franchise for 30 billion unless it was just literally a passion project or rich UAE royalty. When it catches up, you'll start to see that the ownership change will become less frequent and will almost become like an NFL, where the Redskins come up for sale, or the Commanders. But I think till then, whilst it still appears cheap, saying cheap like you and I have 300, 500 million, whilst it appears relatively to very wealthy institutions and individuals, the hand changing will continue till it reaches the point that the number of individuals and institutions that can buy them are so limited that the ownership actually kind of
plateaus a bit.
Yeah, curtails or settles.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be interesting. Hopefully, we get to that point. We're still doing podcasts then, to see how, like, if our predictions are right. I'm really excited and looking forward to like the next week even of football finance, because this week has been crazy. There's even things we've not even been able to touch upon, really, honestly. Like, the football and finance seems to be like, ever since we started having this conversation, obviously we've been looking at it more, but there just seems to be more and more stuff that's happening in news around it. So yeah, I think it'd be great if we could see what happens next week and sign off here. Say thanks to all people who watch this. Thanks. Comment, like, subscribe, share with your friends, your colleagues at work, your finance guy, whoever.
Finance guy who works in the Premier League that's
that's like
it's getting rings run around them by Manchester United, Man City, Chelsea.
These two guys just talk crud. But yeah, appreciate you guys, and speak to you again next week.
Bye, everyone. Okay.